You have a personal interest in this.
I have
You
a
do.
personal interest. I do.
So welcome. So we're going to start with, this is just like a 4-minute video from the smartest show ever made on television, The West Wing. I'm rewatching it now for the 3rd time. This is a scene where President Bartlett, who you'll see speaking, is talking to a bunch of talk show personalities. So I'm going to turn the lights off, and let's just watch this real quickly.
So this switch back here, I never can remember what.
Yeah.
There?
Yeah, that's good enough, I think. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I wish I could spend more than a few minutes with you, but the polls don't close in the East for another hour, and there are plenty of election results still left to falsify. You know, with so many people participating in the political and social debate through call-in shows, it's a good idea to be reminded every once in a while. It's a good idea to be reminded of the awesome impact. I'm sorry, you're Dr. Jenna Jacobs, right?
Yes, sir.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
The awesome impact of the airwaves and how that translates into the furthering of our national discussions, but obviously also how it can forgive me, Dr. Jacobs. Are you an MD?
A PhD.
A PhD.
Yes, sir.
In psychology?
No, sir.
Theology?
No.
Social work?
I have a PhD in English literature.
I'm asking because on your show, people call in for advice, and you go by the name Dr. Jacobs on your show, and I didn't know if maybe your listeners were confused by that and assumed you had advanced training in psychology, theology, or healthcare.
I don't believe they are confused. No, sir.
Good. I like your show. I like how you call homosexuality an abomination.
I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does.
Yes, it does. Leviticus
18:22.
chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions while I had you here. I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. She's a Georgetown sophomore, speaks fluent Italian, always cleared the table when it was her turn. What would a good price for her be? While thinking about that, can I ask another? My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Here's one that's really important, because we've got a lot of sports fans in this town. Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football? Can Notre Dame? Can West Point? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from 2 different threads? Think about those questions, would you? One last thing. Well, you may be mistaking this for your monthly meeting of the ignorant tight-ass club. In this building, when the president stands, nobody sits. Toby. Yes, Mr. President. That's how I beat him. Just take that crap off.
Okay. So, let me turn the lights back on for us.
That was really good, by the way.
Yeah.
Isn't that an
I might
amazing
have to
clip?
start watching
Yeah.
this show again.
Oh, you have to watch it. It's amazing. It really is. It is the smartest show, I think, on TV that I've ever seen. It's all on Netflix. I literally am watching it for the 3rd time now. It's just incredible. Okay, just get this stuff out of the way. So she said that, and he said, that homosexuality is banned according to the Bible. Leviticus, what did he say? 18:22, I think, or 20:13. So what I want to do with you is we're not going to do all of these texts, but I wanted to walk through with you some of the traditional sources on homosexuality and on gay marriage, right? So the first two are the most well known. So the first one is from the second paragraph, the little not indented part. You shall not copulate with a man, or you shall not lie with a man. As one lies with a woman, it is an abomination. That's where she said it's an abomination, right? And we do see this word abomination in lots of other places. It's very unclear what it actually means. It's really not clear that abomination is either the terrible thing that it sounds like or that it's not so terrible. It's very unclear. And then two chapters later, we have if a man lies with another man as he lies with a woman, both of them have acted abominably, there's that word again, and they shall be put to death. So those are the two biggies that everyone cites for homosexuality is an abomination, and you have to be stoned for it. So this little indented piece, this is going to set up a really important distinction that is important to bring to the conversation. So in antiquity, Jews and most other people believed that it was the man and his semen who provides the actual life, the seed, and that the woman was merely the soil, so to speak, in which the seed grew to maturity to be born. It was considered almost like murder to allow the seed to be wasted through masturbation, homosexuality, or sexual intercourse without intent to procreate. It was also erroneously believed that semen, the precious fluid, was limited in quantity, so that if it was wasted, the energy and strength of the man would thereby be reduced. And then later on, you see from Rambam, Maimonides, it is forbidden to destroy seed. Therefore, a man may not practice coitus interruptus. So this piece right here about wasting seed is a really important perspective to bring to this conversation, because in the Bible, there's no such thing as being a homosexual. That doesn't exist in the Bible. Men have sex with men, women have sex with women, perhaps, but homosexuality is really a 20th century invention. The idea that, it's not an invention, it's always existed, but the terminology and the way that we understand the word homosexuality today is not the same thing that they're talking about here. What they're talking about here is a very specific act that results in the wasting of seed. And that is a problem for the Bible, especially if semen is limited in quantity, and if the purpose of having this relationship, this sexual relationship, is not for the sake of having children. So along the same lines, if you were having sex with a woman who's infertile, that would also be wasting seed. That would also be an abomination, according to these texts. So this whole category is called Mishkav Zachor, and here's how Rambam, I'm like 3/4 of the way down the page, here's how he defines it. When one male lies with another male, from the moment of penetration, both are punishable by stoning. Now, the word penetration is very, very important here, because he's highlighting something in the text that everybody jumps over. The text originally in Leviticus says, a man shall not lie with a man as he lies with a woman. Okay. How does a man lie with a woman? What is the text talking about when it says a man lies a man lies with a woman? How does a man lie with a woman? Penetration, right? That's sex. So how would a man lie with a man as he lies with a woman? Well, there's one way.
Right.
Anal sex.
Right.
And so when Rambam here says penetration, that highlights for us what the biblical text may actually be talking about. It isn't necessarily talking about homosexuality. It may not even be talking about homosexual sex. It may be talking about one very specific act, which is not just prohibited for two men. It may also be prohibited for a man and a woman. That's one possibility. So turn to the next page, if you would. This is Rabbi Elliot Dorff. Elliot Dorff is a very important leader and teacher in the conservative movement. So he says at the top, anal sex is not the equivalent of homosexuality or even of homosexual sex. Both a homosexual orientation and homosexual acts are to be distinguished from anal sex acts, which are practiced by no lesbians, some gay men, and some heterosexuals. As a result, if anal sex is judged as abnormal in either a descriptive or prescriptive sense, it is that which we should discuss, not homosexuality or homosexual sex acts per se. Now, here's where we get into a little bit of trouble. If we're going to say that one specific homosexual act, it's not even a homosexual act, if one specific sexual act is prohibited or is an abomination, how do you enforce that law, right? And can you enforce that law for gay couples when there are plenty of laws about prohibited sexual acts, like a man should not have sex with his wife while she's having her period for a certain amount of time before and after a period? We don't go around enforcing that. Is it fair of us to enforce this on gay couples when we don't enforce other sexual laws on heterosexual couples? If we want to buy into the idea that this one particular act is how we should understand that biblical text. Okay? Jump in anytime, by the way. Any questions or thoughts? Okay. So, lesbianism. The Torah does not talk about two women at all. It's simply not an issue. By the way, I didn't put it in here, but at least I don't think I did. But there's one. I put one story in here. We do have other stories in the Bible that talk about homosexuality or at least homosexual sex. The most famous is Sodom and Gomorrah, right? That's where sodomy got its name, from Sodom and Gomorrah. And the idea there was that Lot, the people of the town came to Lot, and they wanted his daughter, and he said no. No, I'm sorry. They wanted the two men who were inside. They were actually angels, but they said, bring the men out so that we can rough them up and have sex with them, whatever. And Lot said, no, but here, take my daughter instead, as if that's somehow supposed to make us feel better. It's a terrible, terrible story. But based on that, the rabbis tell us that one of the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah was homosexuality, or again, if we want to be very specific, this one act of anal penetration. But lesbianism is nowhere found in the Torah. And so we leave it up to the rabbis to really take this law against homosexual sex and extend it to women. The problem with this, of course, is what Rabbi Dorff just wrote, is that anal sex can't happen between women. It's not a possibility in the way that it is for men. So we do, however, have this one little teaching: you shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. And the rabbis build upon this, Rambam specifically: for women to be sexually intimate with each other is forbidden, as this is one of the practices of the land of Egypt. So much of what we do as Jews is not so much to define ourselves in our own terms, but to define ourselves in contradistinction to other peoples and other nations. And so this is an example of that. This is what they did, and so we don't do it. That isn't necessarily saying it's bad. It's just saying this is what they did, and so we don't do it. However, even though the act is prohibited, it is not punishable, because there's no specific Torah prohibition, and sexual intercourse is not possible. So again, Rambam is realizing here what the Torah prohibition is really about. It's not about a state of being. It's not about an orientation. It's about a specific sexual act. This is why such women are not prohibited to their husbands because of prostitution, for there is no such prostitute. For there is here no such prostitution. A husband should prevent his wife from such practices by forbidding women known to do such things access to her, and by forbidding her to go out to them. Leave it up to the husband to take care of his wife, right? And to tell her what to do. So another famous story from the Torah, which many people suggest is a story of not prohibition against anal sex, but a real story of homosexual love, is the story of Jonathan and David. So Jonathan was Saul's son, King Saul's son, and David was the up-and-coming. Saul was terrified by David. He was intimidated by David. He thought David was going to take his crown, which of course he eventually did. And David and Jonathan had a very, very close relationship. Saul was constantly trying to pit Jonathan against David. But here we have a couple of verses that give us this just precious image of what what David and Jonathan's relationship looked like. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking to Saul, this is Jonathan, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Reminds me of love your neighbor as yourself. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant, a brit, with David, because he loved him as his own soul. 2 times in the same 2 verses. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his apparel, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all of his servants that they should slay David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan caused David to swear again for the love that he had to him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. If this isn't poetic love language, I don't know what is. Now, is this evidence of a homosexual relationship? Who knows? Who knows? But I don't think it's too far of a stretch to suggest that this gives us a very different image of what the Bible imagines homosexuality to be than the prohibitions do. The prohibitions are very specific and very legally oriented, whereas this is very emotive and please.
So why is the one sexual act prohibited? Because at the beginning it was that you don't waste the semen, but there are obviously other ways to waste semen.
Well, those are prohibited too. All wasting of seed is prohibited. This is one example of how to waste seed. Now, you're raising a good question. I would phrase the question, please tell me if I'm getting this wrong. Is this worse than other ways of wasting seed? Like, is homosexual sex somehow worse than masturbation? My answer would be no. And I don't think the Torah would bear out that it's any worse.
Okay.
I think that I believe the prohibition for both is the same. You're killing the potential for life. This, by the way, gets a little bit into why women are considered impure at certain times of the month. It's not bad or negative. It's all about this potential for life and killing the potential for life. For men, that's semen. For women, it's the egg. And for women, the egg dies naturally. But just because the egg dies naturally, or it's not fertilized and so it dies, that means by default that a woman's body has come in contact with death, right? And therefore, anyone who comes in contact with death becomes impure. For women, unfortunately, it's involuntary, or fortunately, it's involuntary. For men, it's voluntary, which is why we are prohibited from wasting seed. One of the ways in which we might do that is through anal sex. So I don't think it stands out amongst those prohibitions.
Okay.
Well, it does. That's not fair. It does stand out. Clearly, it stands out.
Right.
But I don't think from a legal perspective it's any different. That's my take.
That's I have a question for
Yeah,
you.
please.
Only because I remember, we had a discussion of when does life begin here at the temple and how
Right.
what we feel. So is it just because it's potentially life-giving or not?
So there is a difference between the potential for life and life. And one of the ways we see this, there's a biblical text, I don't remember if we talked about this, about two men fighting and they push a woman, a pregnant woman. The punishment for the man who pushed her is different if the baby dies or is injured, the baby meaning the fetus dies or is injured, versus if the woman is injured or dies. The punishment is greater if the woman is injured or dies than if the fetus is. And one of the things that teaches us is that there is a difference in value between a life that has been fully realized and a life that is still in its potential phases, perhaps. There are a lot of different perspectives on when life begins. I'm not sure that's for now, but there is a qualitative difference between potential for life and life. At the same time, when you destroy the potential for life, or when you come in contact with the potential for life that has been destroyed naturally, you are still considered impure. And for men, because it's a choice, it's a prohibition. Okay? All right. So the next section of this is about 5 different modern commentaries from different perspectives, from Orthodox, conservative, and Reform perspectives, that I really wanted to read through and sort of talk with you. And then the last thing I'd like to do is, which this last text does, is talk specifically about marriage and what does that look like for a gay couple. So would one of you be willing to read the first one? It's from Rabbi Elliot Dorff again.
I, for one, cannot believe that the God who created us all produced a certain percentage of us. Right,
Yes, sorry, there should be us.
to have sexual drives that cannot be legally expressed under any circumstances. That is simply mind-boggling and frankly un-Jewish. Furthermore, it seems to me that to ask gays and lesbians to remain celibate all their lives is not halakhically required. If gays and lesbians are right in asserting that they have no choice in being homosexual, then they are as forced to be gay as straights are forced to be straight.
And I would extend that to say that in the same way that we don't tell heterosexual couples, you have to be celibate because you don't follow all of the laws of forbidden sexuality. What gives us the right to say to homosexuals, you have to be celibate because you don't follow all the prohibitions of sexuality? Okay, from Rabbi Herschel Matt.
There are other ways of contributing to the survival of the Jewish people. Aside from physically begetting or bearing children, many Jewish homosexuals support worthy Jewish causes and institutions. Some make their contributions as teachers of Judaism.
So he's addressing what you said before, Skip, about what's the real problem here. The real problem here is wasting seed or not having sex for procreational purposes. Is that a word? Procreational? Procreative purposes.
We know what you mean.
Right? And so he's saying that procreating is more than just a biological activity. It's a communal activity. It's a educational activity. There's lots that go into that. Homosexuality is no different from any other antisocial or This is Rabbi Norman Lamb. He's an Orthodox teacher. Okay. Homosexuality is no different from any other antisocial or anti-halachic act, where it is legitimate to distinguish between the objective act itself, including its social and moral consequences, and the mentality and inner development of the person who perpetrates the act. To use halachic terminology, that's Jewish legal terminology, the objective crime remains a ma'aseh avera, a ma'aseh avera, a forbidden act, whereas the person who transgresses is considered innocent on the grounds of ones, force beyond one's control. So what he's saying here is, in a not so pleasant way, to my mind, he's saying that we also, even in the Orthodox world, we have to distinguish between the person and the act, or the orientation and the act. And he brings up two different Jewish terms, or Hebrew terms, that are really important. One is a maseh avera. Maseh means an act or a deed. Avera means a sin. So a sinful act. Anal penetration, anal sex, is a maseh avera. But when you do a maseh avera, when you do a forbidden act, because you're under onus, you're under duress, or you're under a force beyond your own control, then we can't hold you accountable as a human being. You shouldn't have done it, but you as a human being cannot be held accountable because you did it under duress. And his argument is that people who are gay, just like people who are straight, it's not a choice. They're under the duress of their orientation. And so we cannot hold people guilty for acting on that onus.
That's very interesting.
Isn't it interesting from an Orthodox perspective? Now, the other piece that he's saying here is that in the Orthodox world and in the Jewish world, while we should still say that homosexual sex, and I'm trying to get into his head here, that homosexual sex is not okay, that it's avera, it's a sin, and it's toeva, it's an abomination. He would also say, I hope, that those people, because we can't hold them guilty, should be loved and accepted and appreciated and included in the community. I think that's what he would say. Okay, would you like to read from Janet Martyr?
The Jewish values and principles, which I regard as eternal, transcendent, and divinely ordained, do not condemn homosexuality. The Judaism I cherish and affirm teaches love of humanity, respect for the spark of divinity in every person, and the human right to live with dignity. The God I worship endorses loving, responsible, and committed human relationships, regardless of the sex of the persons involved.
So this is clearly a more liberal voice, right? I struggle with this particular one, although I agree with everything that it says. I struggle with it because as Jews, it's not enough to say, I don't think. It's not enough to say, my values and principles tell me that this should be okay. That's not the way Jewish law works. Jewish law requires that we look at the law, interpret it, struggle with it, and try and understand it differently. And try and understand it, not differently, try and understand it as it applies in our world today. So what I would love is for this same teaching to include something about how to reinterpret or how to understand the prohibitions against what some people would say is homosexuality differently. Because Jews, it's not just about our values and principles. It's about our laws also. So that's one piece that I struggle with here. The CCAR, this next one, is the official movement of Reform rabbis, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, I think it calls.
Mhm. Whereas justice and human dignity are cherished Jewish values, and whereas the institutions of Reform Judaism have a long history of support for civil and equal rights for gays and lesbians, and whereas North American organizations of the Reform movement have passed resolutions in support of civil marriage for gays and lesbians, therefore we do hereby resolve that the relationship of a Jewish same-gendered couple is worthy of affirmation through appropriate Jewish ritual.
So check the date there, 98.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe how long ago that is? I mean, the country just, we just got on board as pretty much as a country, but the Reform movement was there back in 1998. It's really kind of astonishing. So this last text deals specifically, I think, with relationships. And this is from, again, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, and this is from the Rabbinical Assembly. This is a responsa that was written for the not so much for the Rabbinical Assembly, but for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which is sort of an offshoot of the RA. Okay, we favor, so this is a three conservative rabbis writing. We favor the establishment of committed and loving relationships for gay and lesbian Jews. The celebration of such a union is appropriate with blessings over wine and shehachianu, with psalms and other readings to be developed by local authorities. Yet can these relationships be recognized under the rubric of kiddushin, Jewish marriage? So let me just pause for a moment. So the Jewish wedding ceremony has two parts, irusin and kiddushin. Irusin is sort of like the betrothal, it's a little bit like engagement. In antiquity, these two pieces of the ceremony were separated by up to a year, which is sort of like engagement and marriage. Nowadays, they've been brought together. So irusin has the exchange of rings. Some people do vows, and you say a couple blessings. Then you read the ketubah, and then you have the kiddushin, which is sort of the seal, that you're putting the stamp on it, the seal of approval. And that's when you do the 7 marriage blessings. And usually the rabbi talks a little bit then. So the question here is, can gay marriage can a gay marriage ceremony be created within the rubric of kiddushin, which is not just Jewish marriage? It is a halachic category. It's a halachic framework, a Jewish legal framework for marriage, and it's a very complicated question, because according to kiddushin, a man acquires a woman, a man can't acquire another man. So they're struggling with these kinds of questions. How do we fit this new ceremony that we want to create, that we want to honor, into this ancient structured?
Before you go on,
please.
Is the concept of marriage between a man and a woman in the Bible, or is this something that's just sort of evolved post-biblical times?
The concept that we have today?
Yeah.
It's based from the Bible, absolutely. But it's not. It has certainly grown and evolved since then.
But again, out of ignorance, what is there in the Bible that discusses marriage at all?
I'd have to look. I don't know all the citations. I have to look them up. But I would start with the biblical characters who get married. Look at Rachel, Jacob, and not Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, right? And how
It just kind of says they get married. I mean,
oh no, not at all. No, there was an exchange. Jacob had to work for
7 years,
Rachel,
right,
Leah,
right.
and then there was a dowry that was given. We also have a good group of laws about who you can get married to, what that should look like. The rabbinic tradition around marriage builds not just on examples from the Torah about marriage, but also on lots of other things. So, for example, for a marriage to be kosher, because marriage is a contract, it's a legal contract, you have to have all the laws that derive from the Bible about witnesses apply to marriage. So what we have today as marriage is I would say, an amalgamation of rabbinic interpretations of both biblical narratives about marriage and also legal information from the Bible, not only about marriage, but also about it's not legal, legal contracts, legal britot, covenants.
Okay.
I think a lot of it comes from there. I'd have to look up the specific citations, though. It's a good question. It's a really good question.
All right, so keep going. I just
Okay,
wanted to
sorry.
stop.
Okay, so two model ceremonies they give. One that closely follows the traditional Jewish wedding liturgy and one that starts fresh. Each ceremony accomplishes the following tasks, which we consider to be essential to any Jewish marriage ceremony. A, the couple is welcomed. That's usually, we say, Bruchim Habaim, may you be welcomed. And then there's another verse that you add if you're in a synagogue. And God's blessings are requested for their marriage. B, traditional symbols of the celebration, wine, symbols of commitment, such as rings, are used to add significance to the moment. C, a document of covenant committing the couple to live a life of mutual fidelity and responsibility is read and witnessed. Just want to pause here. So it's interesting that they didn't say ketubah. They don't say ketubah in here. Because again, a ketubah is a legal document that you can't just change the words of. And so I think that one of the things that they wrestle with a lot is in a conservative Jewish marriage ceremony for two men or two women, if you can't use a ketubah because you can't change the language and it talks about men and women, can we just write a new ketubah, or do we have to create sort of a new category, which is a document of covenant? This covenant is affirmed at the ring ceremony and constitutes the halachic mechanism for binding the couple together as a family. D, blessings thanking God for this sacred moment of loving covenant are recited, and the couple's relationship is linked to the broader narrative of the Jewish people and its redemption. And again, they didn't mention the Sheva Brachot, because again, the Sheva Brachot, the seven marriage blessings, have very specific language. They talk about kol chatan v'kol chala, the groom and the bride. There are lots of people, myself included, who, when we do gay marriages, we use the same exact language, but we change words. Like instead of chatan and kala, we say re'im ha'ahuvim, which means these loving partners. There's some other changes that we've got. I don't have my text with me here, but the conservative movement has really, and of course this was not accepted unanimously, but we don't need that in the conservative movement, right? As long as you have 6 votes, it gets passed, even if you're the minority. But what they've really done is, later than the Reform movement, it took 14 years longer, but they've said that gay marriages deserve the respect and the tradition, the structured tradition that traditional marriages have, and that we can create those models, that we can create those ceremonies, you drawing upon traditional sources, maybe tweaking them because we're not doing a traditional halachic marriage, so some things have to be different, but because the Bible has for so long been misunderstood as banning homosexuality, which according to many poskim, many teachers, it just isn't doing. It's banning one specific act, and given the fact that there are many other acts, as President Bartlett said, that we ignore on a regular basis, why would we punish people who are under onus? They're under duress. It's not duress, it's not the right word. They're under, what was the word it used? They're under, what's the word again? I'm forgetting the word he used.
The grounds of onus.
Onus.
Thank you. Yeah, they're being forced beyond one's control. Why would we impose a more stringent approach to a prohibition for one group of people than we would for another group of people? So what have marriages that I've done looked like? Honestly, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between what I did in a regular marriage. I usually send people to, if you go to ketubah.com, which is one of my favorite places to send people, it just has every kind of ketubah you can imagine, and they have multiple different texts, and they have one text that is not a traditional ketubah text, that is specifically written for same-sex couples. But the ones that I've done, I haven't done that many, but the ones that I've done, honestly, they really don't look any different from a traditional marriage. If you knew all the words, yes, you would hear some of the words different, but they look very similar. Just as much joy. One day.
So what happens, because clearly this is, if you accept the premise that some of this is prohibited because of the wasting of seed, which we now know scientifically is not valid.
Well, no.
We don't know
We know
that.
scientifically that it's not limited. But if you're wasting seed, you're wasting seed.
But it's not like
Semen is still the potential for life.
Right, but it's not like it sounded like the explanation was you only have a fixed supply
Yes,
over
no,
your lifetime.
Correct.
And that part we know is not.
So that actually isn't part of the halakha. That's a historical note. The halakha, the Jewish law, is you don't waste seed. Period. There's no discussion of limited amounts or unlimited amounts. That, as a historical note, this commentator said, and by the way, one of the reasons they may have had this prohibition is because they thought that semen was limited.
Because I think of masturbation,
right.
And if that's a sin, there are a lot of sinners
and it is
out there,
and
it starts at a pretty young age, and younger than you would want to be procreating. I suspect.
And look, there are many people, not so much in the Jewish world, but in the evangelical Christian world, who argue against condoms and who argue against birth control, in part for this reason, because they believe that you're preventing the potential for life from coming to fruition. And it's based on the same text. Not on the homosexuality text, but on texts about wasting semen.
Well, the reason I bring that up is clearly we don't do animal sacrifices anymore. So there must be some reason that the rabbis say, yes, even though it's in the Bible, we just don't do that anymore. And same with all the other examples that that's right up on the excerpt. So
well, those things we do. So we don't do all of them, of course. So some things we don't do, right? We don't do sacrifices. The reason we don't do sacrifices is because the temple was destroyed. And the basic rule of thumb around the temple is if stuff that was done in the temple could only be done in the temple. And if you can't do it exactly the way it was done, don't do it. That's one of the arguments against playing guitar on Shabbat, against playing music instruments on Shabbat, because they played musical instruments in the temple. And since the temple doesn't stand anymore, we shouldn't try and do what they did. Until the next temple is built, when Messiah comes, then we can play our instruments, right? So that's one category, things that we just don't do because we can't do them properly. Another category, like the example of mixing wool and linen, that we do. And it's called shatnez, and there are shatnez factories around the country where Orthodox people will send their clothing and have them tested to make sure it's not a mix of wool and linen. The only exception to shatnez, mixing wool and linen, is in tzitzit.
I was going to say, yeah.
Right? That's because tzitzit have to be wool, and if your clothing is linen, you still have to, if your four-cornered garment is linen, you still have to put tzitzit on it. That's the only exception. So that we still do. Stoning people, not so much. We don't do the stoning thing. And that's not because we decided it was wrong, so much as it's because the rabbis created so many, not fences, they created so many barriers. It's similar to capital punishment, right? The capital punishment in rabbinic literature, you see the rabbis moving farther and farther and farther away from the biblical perspective of we should put this person to death, even for a terrible crime, even for murder. The rabbis they don't want us to do this. They can't say don't do it because the Bible says do it. But what they can say is, well, you need this many witnesses. You need the witnesses to be this good. And the witnesses can't be related in any way, shape, or form. And you have to have the testimony this way. And you can have texts that say a Sanhedrin, a high court that kills one person in 70 years is an evil high court. So they say lots and lots of things that distance us from the law without actually uprooting the law. And my sense is that around Shabbat and things like that, that's exactly what we've done. How are you going to prove that someone actually broke Shabbat? You have to have this kind of witness. You have to, so, and they'll say, an argument against the vast majority of people who are breaking Shabbat is they don't know they're breaking Shabbat. I would say the vast majority of people in the world who are not observing Shabbat don't know they should be observing.
But then the other thing, there are the rules that are in the Bible,
right? And
then there are the way that the rabbis have interpreted the rules, and you could turn on a light and say, hey, there's nothing in the Bible that says electricity didn't exist back then.
What we should be stoned for is lighting a fire. How many of us actually light a fire on Shabbat? Right.
No.
Right. Well, people might, but your point is very well taken. Right. The punishment for death may not extend to the rabbinic understandings of those original biblical texts. You're absolutely right. What's unique and I think what I love about what Rabbi Lamb, the Orthodox rabbi, brings to this discussion is the idea of onus, the idea that this being gay is beyond a person's control, and you cannot hold someone guilty for an act that's done under onus, under duress. We have to love that person.
Well, I think that's a very important point, because I think there are still many, many people in this world that think that it's a choice.
Right.
And believe me, it's not a choice.
Right.
Because, it's not an easy choice. You
Right.
don't want to choose that.
One rabbi that, if you're interested in more about this, I would recommend, his name is Stephen Greenberg.
Okay.
He wrote a book. He was in a movie about this. He's an Orthodox rabbi who's out and gay, very vocal, an amazing teacher. I want to make sure I'm giving you the right, it's Rabbi Stephen, I'm almost positive that's what I'm, hold on. Yes, Rabbi Stephen Greenberg. I'm sorry, so Rabbi Stephen Greenberg,
Okay.
and his book is Wrestling with God and Men: Homosexuality in the Jewish Tradition. It was written in 2005. It's a wonderful book, and he's just a wonderful, inspiring teacher. Fantastic person.
So with conservative Judaism, is it now up to each rabbi to decide whether he or
They
she
want
is
to
willing
perform?
to perform the ceremony?
Exactly.
So I'm assuming if the rabbi is willing to perform the ceremony, it can be done in the synagogue, right?
Well, so I don't know about
That's a
synagogues. I can tell you that up north, I had been doing gay marriages for a while, and this was a number of years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And a couple who was a member of my shul came and asked me to do the service in the synagogue, and that I had not done before. I hadn't done the service on the bima in the synagogue, just because families had never opted for that. And I said to them, I will be honored to do your wedding, but I can't speak for the shul. I think the shul needs to go through a process. We need to talk about this. And so they ended up not getting married at the synagogue, but only because we went through a year-long process of study, which was just an amazing experience. And in the end, they voted to allow it without hesitation. But that process was really important for us. In some synagogues may struggle with it. I don't know. I can't imagine that our synagogue would, although I certainly can't speak for the ritual.
I'm sure there would be some individuals.
Yeah, of course. But I think as a community, I think we would embrace that. I would have no hesitation whatsoever in doing that.
Since now, and I know it's fairly recent, since now the Supreme Court has done what it's done, and now civil marriages are legal in all 50 states. I mean, I would think that would make it easier for rabbis to be willing to do the religious ceremonies, no?
It could. My gut, though, is that if you are uncomfortable doing a religious ceremony, you're uncomfortable doing it because it would be like asking a traditional rabbi to do a wedding ceremony without a ketubah, right? It's not halachic. It's not a halachic ceremony anymore. And so to ask a traditional rabbi to do a non-halachic ceremony is, I think, very comfortable. Look, in part, that's why I'm still struggling with interfaith marriage, because, and I don't want to link interfaith marriage to gay marriage, which a lot of people do. They're completely different issues. But I can't do what I consider to be a halachic marriage with a Jew and a non-Jew, and so that's where I'm stuck, right? I don't even know what I would do, and I can't explain why, but for some reason I've figured out, and I've without hesitation, how I can do that for gay couples. I don't know what's sticking for me, but I haven't, honestly, the truth is I haven't spent enough time looking into it, because I wouldn't be allowed to anyway, working here or at any other conservative synagogue. So, but I think the issue for most rabbis who don't do it is either they're homophobic, or it's a real halachic issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that the state sanctioning it would make all that much of a difference. Although I will never forget the first wedding that I did, where I got to say, according to the laws of Torah, laws of Moses in Israel, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That happened long before the Supreme Court happened, but that was quite a moment when I got to say that. So
I know that interfaith and, this two totally different subjects, but it just really, I don't know. Here I go, I'm related to interfaith too. It just gets my gourd that there are so many Jewish couples that never step foot in a synagogue, don't raise their children Jewish, don't have any, and it's okay to marry them. I don't get it. That's my own. I just wanted to.
right. I think that two thoughts. One is a numbers thought, and that is that there seems to be evidence that two Jews, no matter how disconnected from the institutionalized Jewish world, their children do tend to be more connected to Judaism. There does seem to be some evidence. It's not overwhelming, but there does seem to be some evidence. But the other thing I would say is that our definitions of who is a Jew, the way we think about that, and the fact that it's linked to matrilineal descent, or there's a drawing of blood, the whole way of thinking about identity is changing in the world much faster than it's changing in the Jewish world. The fact that forget gay marriage, the very issue of who is a man and who is a woman nowadays is being questions are being asked. There's a teacher from the conservative seminary, Linda just told me, from the conservative seminary, who's coming down to Florida and teaching about transgender Jews. Right? The world is thinking about identity differently, and it's not as black and white as it used to be. And yet in the Jewish world, it really we're kind of stuck. We're stuck at you're either Jewish or you're not Jewish, and this is how we determine that. I don't know how long that's going to last, and I don't know if it does last, is that good, or if it doesn't last, I don't know if that's good either. I don't know. I'm sure there are pluses and minuses on both sides. Yeah, but so that's the quick and dirty about Judaism's perspective on gay marriage. There's if you want to watch any more of the episode, by the way, you can just Google Bartlett and Bible and you'll find it. But I would recommend, if you are interested more in this, Rabbi Stephen Greenberg, there's also, I'm not remembering the name now. There was a wonderful movie that he was involved with. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the name. What's it called when you real life events? A documentary, a wonderful documentary that was made about this question. And the last thing I'll tell you is that there's a long teshuvah, a long response that was written by Rabbi David Golinkin, who's a rabbi in Jerusalem. It's called Dear David. It's a stunning piece of work. If you're interested in the Jewish legal perspective, it's a stunning piece of work about all the different questions around homosexuality. He addresses the text. It's an amazing piece of work. If you're interested, you can Google.
So what happens to you if you're an Orthodox Jew and you're homosexual?
So that you need to read on Rabbi Stephen Greenberg's thing. He's the expert on that. It's tricky. I'll tell you that one of my dear friends from high school, his name was David Bianco. He was the president of my USY chapter. He was president of my USY region. He became international president of USY. The year after he was international president of USY, he came out as gay. And back then, it was nothing like today. I mean, it was terrible. Right. He of course is still gay, but he's a very unique guy now. He argues against gay marriage. He feels that gay people should not get married. Really? Because he's an Orthodox Jew. He doesn't deny that he's gay. He doesn't, he doesn't say he's a bad person, but he says the Torah is very specific about these certain laws, and we have to follow them as Orthodox people. It's very interesting. But I would highly recommend Rabbi Stephen Greenberg for that question and his book, Wrestling with God and Men. I have it in my office. I'm happy to share it with you.
So but marriage doesn't, so that means he can't have a relationship with another man? I mean. No. See that?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
Right.
There are multiple. There are lots of different issues. There's wasting seed. Right. That's going to be the biggest issue.
Right.
But again, can you have a relationship? Can you have a relationship does not mean a sexual. He could have lots of relationships. Question is, can he have a sexual relationship?
Well, and there are lots of ways to waste seed. So,
Right.
you know,
And it doesn't have to be with another person. Absolutely. Yeah. So lots and lots of questions. But to me, the good news is we have Orthodox sources, conservative sources, and certainly Reform sources that all say that being gay is something you're born with. It is not a choice that you make, and that your relationships with other people that you love, your love for another person, whether that expresses itself in sexuality or not is not important, but your relationships with other people need to be honored and respected and celebrated. And that to me is the takeaway about gay marriage. So with that, I'm going to turn this off.